Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for coming out today. As you've already heard, I am not Scott Guthrie, which is great. He's about 3 feet taller. So today we've seen quite a bit this week here at Devintersections. We've seen a lot of great demos about Azure, a lot of tooling, a lot of DevOps, a lot of IT ops and AI and data. What we wanted to do is we wanted to get the Azure team together and share with you kind of the highlights of the week, some things that maybe you had missed or maybe you'd already seen, but you wanted to dive a little deeper. And then at the end of this, all these great, awesome demos there to come out and do for you with us. I want to give you a chance to gather feedback, to ask us questions directly through a panel, and we'll come around the audience and let you ask questions to us so we can get those answers back to you. You know, it really is a good time to be a developer when your clicker is not working. There you go. It really is a good time to be a developer out here. And we've got a lot of great stories this week about how the world's running on software in different places with these apps that we've built. And a lot of you have built these applications. I think I'm going to need a new clicker, folks. There we go. So a lot of the tools and apps that you're building, there's a lot of different audiences out here. Some of you are building applications with .NET and deploying to the cloud. And some of you are building applications with JavaScript and Node, maybe building on a Mac with Visual Studio Code. Or maybe you're building something with Xamarin and you're targeting iOS. There we go. And some of you might even be doing things with Python inside of Vim, serving it up to app service on Linux. The good point here is all the tools that you use, all the languages, all the apps, all that is supported for you within Azure. I think I made it a manual clicker, folks, backstage. There we go. That's not a good noise. Your computer is rebooting. Thank you. This looks more like a thermometer, but I'll take it. Let's see here. Hey, it works. Yay, thanks for the crew. All right, many of you build lots of these great apps out there. The nice thing is, and this really impresses me too, is that about 95% of the world's Fortune 500 companies run on Azure. A lot of names that you recognize, some of these that you work for out there, and it's some really great apps that you're all building. Azure enables a lot of these different things. One of the things I wanted to start off today with the stories that we're going to tell you are the developer tooling and the DevOps stories. And to kick these things off, it all has to start with the best tools that we have on the market. Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. If you are the kind of person who wants a full, rich IDE experience, Visual Studio is a great experience. If you're the kind of person who wants a lightweight, fast coding experience, Visual Studio Code is for you. And the really cool thing about this is there's a lot of surveys out there about the value and how the growth of these has come. And in just a couple of years, what we're seeing is that year over year, the #1 and #2 tools out there are Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, chosen by all of you. Recently, Stack Overflow had a survey of over 90,000 developers responding. And these developers came back and said, #1, #2, Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio are the ones that they choose to use over and over again for many different languages and platforms on the market today. This is really impressive. We can do quite a bit with these. And to share how this story works, I'm going to invite on stage Kendra and Allison to show you how these tools work. So let's have a hand for both Not Scott and Not Scott.
Okay, so we're just going to get started with the first few tips. The main one, #1, live share.
Yeah, so if we go to my screen, because I think we're seeing Kendra's screen, perfect. I've already started a live share session, which now comes in box with Visual Studio 2019. And the great thing about live share is that it allows you to work collaboratively, even if one of your coworkers or collaborators is remote. So if we switch over to Kendra's screen, you'll see that Visual Studio Code is loading up. And actually, if you go to Teams, you'll see that I just sent her a link that Visual Studio created. She clicked on it, and it automatically started loading Visual Studio Code. So live share really allows you to use the tools that you're comfortable with. If you're always on code, or maybe you're on your laptop versus your dev box, we can collaborate with Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, or any combination of those. And the best part is, Kendra doesn't have to have the solution that I have on my machine here. She doesn't have to have C#. She doesn't have to have any SDKs or environment setup that I've already done on my machine. She gets to leverage all of the power and everything that I already have set up on my machine in order to get a peek into this solution and collaboratively edit with me. So I think here you'll see on Kendra's screen, I have a cursor. She's able to see my highlighting. I can, write weird things if I really want to. And we've got
if you really want to, yeah.
Yeah, and so we've got a full co-editing experience, and we could spend, 20 minutes on this alone?
We have before. But let's skip on to the next productivity fix. So I am actually getting the full code fixes and refactorings. All of this is loading from, again, Allison's computer and Allison's context. So I can go ahead and pull members up from classes. And if I switch over to Visual Studio, I can actually go ahead and pull members up to a base type in a full modal dialog. So this is when you have a class that's implementing a certain interface and you want to promote all of those members to be accessible to everything that implements that interface. Really simple, that's the number 2. Second code fix and refactoring that you can get. My next one is sync namespace and folder name. So let's say that you are re-architecting your solution a bit, you're dragging and dropping files into new folders in Visual Studio. There we go. So let's say I dragged and dropped something into a folder. I can now, let's see, hold on. Mini demo fail. Swear this was working 2 seconds ago. That's the way it happens though. Okay. How about I delete that one, and now everything's gone. Good, that's what I wanted. That's not what I wanted, guys. Okay, moving that to new location. Anyway, we're opening this. Okay, so let's say I just drag and dropped a C# file into a new folder. I can sync my namespace and folder name by hitting Control Dot with my cursor in the namespace, and it's already offering the refactoring to go ahead and fix it to match my new folder structure. So that's number, yeah, that's good. Okay, and what's your favorite code fix and refactoring?
I struggle with link queries sometimes, and I hear that you guys have done a lot of work with making me look smarter by converting for each loops to link.
Oh yeah, I think you're talking about, for each to link, definitely. So let me find a for each loop here. There we go. So any for each loop that's iterating through an IEnumerable, you can easily convert it to link, and we have a refactoring that'll figure out all the syntax for you so you can impress your coworkers with adoption of new language features. Really easy. So here I can use the link query statement, or if you guys saw, I also had a second refactoring that was an option, or using link call form. So this is the one that uses a lambda, puts it all in the same line, really short, succinct, coding syntax, C# syntax. Pretty nice. Okay, the last tip that I'm really excited to show you all is the new Test Explorer. So in Visual Studio 2019 update 16.2 preview, so if you're in 16.1, you won't get it, but if you have preview, you will get this. You get this updated Test Explorer UI. So we have a bunch of stuff that I want to call out. So we have filters, so I can filter down to, let's say, only not run tests or something like that. We have those at the top. We also have extreme customizability here. So here I have a group by. I can easily switch it to be project namespace and class. So it now changes this entire tiered hierarchy. And I can even customize it to be something completely different, like let's do state and then class. When I click out of here, it's now, grouping it to not run. It's pretty sweet. Okay, cool. So that was all of my tips. Those were top 5.
All right, well, that went slightly better than our talk earlier today.
Yes.
So
a lot of things
thank you all so much for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kendra and Allison. Now, one of the things that you all saw throughout their demos is some of the great things that you could do tooling with these different tools. So Visual Studio Code, you can add a whole bunch of features with Live Share, and definitely invite you to try this out. And they're constantly adding new features to Live Share all the time, such as audio integration and chat and interactive comments recently just added, just in the last week or two. There we go. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit is GitHub. We all use GitHub for our source control. And since the GitHub acquisition, we've seen in the last 6 months, 8 million developers alone added to the GitHub community. 36 million developers around the world use GitHub right now. It's the largest developer community on the planet. It's pretty impressive what we can do there, and over 1 billion contributions are being made to GitHub. 1 billion. Now, what we can do with GitHub, with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio has been seen over the last couple of months as the team has added over 100 new enhancements to the tooling platform. Some of these are adding different features like pull request reviews to Visual Studio Code. So now you can actually review the pull requests and code review your code inside of the tools. Make your approvals, make your comments, do your merges, or push them back for other things to happen with them down the road. So all this integration is really helping us out. One of the things that this enables for us is a really nice pipeline. So we just saw Kendra and Allison create an application. They pushed their code up to GitHub. But between GitHub and then Azure, how do we get everything up there? This is where Azure DevOps really comes in. We now have integration between our tooling, GitHub, and Azure with Azure DevOps Pipelines, so we can deploy our apps incredibly easily with Kubernetes. And I'd like to invite on stage Shane Boyer to show you how we're going to do this with YAML, pipelines, and multi-cloud support.
Thanks, John. All right, so let's paint a scene. We've just gotten back from the conference, and we're super excited about all the code, the dev tools, and all the IT ops talks that we were able to attend that interrupted our Walt Disney World vacation. And after we've thawed out from our frozen vacation, we run into our boss's or our team lead's office, and we said, hey, we learned about this new thing called Kubernetes. And the boss says, is that a new ride? Don't need a fast pass for that? And we said, no, we just need to deploy our code to that. And all I know is that my code lives in GitHub. It's a Node.js app, and I need to get this onto Kubernetes. So how do I do that? And my suggestion is we start with Azure Pipelines in a GitHub marketplace. So I go over to GitHub, go into Marketplace, and I search for Azure Pipelines. First thing I'm going to do is click on Set up a new plan. And it's free for all of our public and private repositories, right, for open source projects. When I click Install it for free, I'm going to configure it on my new repository that has my Node.js app. Now, my Node.js app is just an Express app. It's a web API. And I will complete my order and hit begin installation. When I do that, it's going to jump over to my Azure Pipelines configuration, ask me where my code is. And in this instance, I'm just going to choose GitHub. And it's going to ask me to select where my code is. And this one, I'm just going to say, I have a sample of repository here, and I'm going to search for K8, where my repository is. And it's going to look at my code. And in this particular situation, it sees that I have a Docker file in my code, and we have a template here for Azure Kubernetes Service. Now, my IT ops team was at a conference. They've set up my Kubernetes cluster. It's in Azure. So in this instance, I just select this. It's going to ask me to select my subscription. We're at the mercy of Wi-Fi. I select my subscription. It's going to ask me to select my cluster. Which namespace for Kubernetes? I select default. What's my registry? So I have an Azure Container Registry set up here. And then choose my pipeline's name and validate and configure. At this time, it's going to generate the YAML files that I need in order to deploy this to my Kubernetes cluster. It did that a lot faster than I can actually type out the YAML, because we all love to type YAML. So here I've got all of the configuration I need. So let's walk through this a little bit and see what it looks like. It's going to trigger off of any changes that I make to my master branch in my actual repository. It's got the configuration that I need for my Docker registry connections. It knows where to find my Docker file. It knows what namespace is, because we've selected that in our configuration. It's going to use an Ubuntu VM image in order to build this and deploy it. And it has an actual build stage. So it actually will build my code inside of a container and then push it to my registry as configured. But you'll see also we have now a combined build and deployment pipeline all in a single YAML file. So now here it'll also deploy that file to my Kubernetes cluster with all the configuration. So next I just hit save and run. And it'll commit this YAML configuration file to my repository. So every time I do a commit to that master branch, it'll be able to CI/CD that. So it creates the pipeline, does the deployment, and we're off and running. So you'll see that it's doing the build stage now. If I look at a completed one, it's got a build stage, it's got a deployment stage, and in those deployment stages, I can actually configure multiple deployment locations. I can deploy it on-prem, a dev stage, a production stage, etc. And I can look at logs. So each one of those logs here, it says exactly what it's doing. It's initializing the job, downloading my artifacts, configuring my pull secrets from my repositories. So if there's anything that goes wrong, it's going to tell me exactly what's wrong in that deployment. I can go and fix that without any question, not question what's going on there. Looking at the Azure Pipelines here, I know you're probably asking, do I use tabs, spaces? How do I actually type and make change to this? This is a really good starter set. One of the nice features of this is we have an assistant. This is a really good starter template, but there might be some additional features that you want to add into your actual YAML configuration. And sure, I can go to the bottom, I can hit enter, and I can type if I figure out how to do the tabs and spaces in YAML, because we all like to edit YAML. Show of hands, who likes to edit? Nobody? All right. But what if I wanted to add in testing, for instance, but to test my actual configuration, make sure that's good? I can just type testing. Let's say I have App Center tests involved. I can put in my file paths. I can choose my configuration for my test configuration, hit add, and it'll go ahead and add that configuration at the bottom or at the proper place in my YAML file, and that's great. But talking with a number of you while I was here, I know that we're all .NET developers, right? I don't have a Node.js possibly. We all manage and configure WCF apps. Or we're managing our heritage apps, I believe is our new term, right? So how can this help us? Don't worry, we have you covered as well. Here's an instance where I've got a WCF app that's over 4 years old. I build and configure this with NuGet. I've got a NuGet command that does my package restore. I'm executing an MS build command here to actually run and configure that. I'm doing a Docker build on my legacy/heritage apps, and I'm pushing this to a container registry and then doing the deployment to app service. So looking at what we can do with Azure Pipelines when your code is in GitHub, or in even another repository, we can pull that, build it in a single pipeline for you. So my tip is look at Azure Pipelines, do the click deployments, and be able to deploy your apps no matter where they live, no matter what languages they're using. We have solutions for Java, .NET, Node.js, a Vue, Angular, and it's a click push deployment. So check it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. So we just saw how we can build these applications and deploy them up to the cloud using Kubernetes with GitHub and Azure DevOps. We've got a full pipeline of getting it all up there. Talking a little bit more about GitHub, Everybody likes to use GitHub, and a lot of enterprises are trusting GitHub today so we can build large apps, store our source code in private repositories. So in your enterprises, you've got security. One of the nice things that has come out since the acquisition of GitHub is that we now integrate Azure Active Directory with GitHub. So any security you have at your company with Azure Active Directory, you can now do that with GitHub directly. But even more exciting, in my mind, is the new opportunities to integrate security with GitHub. With all the people who've got GitHub accounts today, you can now sign into Azure with your GitHub account. So this opens the doors to a whole new slew of people who can use Azure directly from GitHub without having to create a new account. It's pretty exciting stuff that they come out with. And now, if you've got GitHub Enterprise at your company and you purchase that, you also get Visual Studio subscriptions. So you get a bundle with both of these two. So if you purchase this with GitHub Enterprise, you also get Visual Studio subscriptions for your company. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now, moving off of developer and DevOps to cloud-native applications. Now, if you're like me, when you hear those terms, you're like, well, what exactly does that mean? The way I like to express this is you're building an application, your team is building one, and then you've got to deploy it somewhere. You often have to think about the infrastructure. What is it going to be served on? What kind of hardware do we have? What's the operating system looking like? With cloud native, the services are taken care of for you. So building applications that are hosted in the cloud with different services based upon your need. And with these, we just saw one of those cloud native application pieces, Azure Kubernetes Service. Shane deployed the app up into the cloud using that. Two common ones you've probably heard of quite a bit are app service and serverless functions. With these on Azure, you can build a whole slew of applications. App service is the most popular service for deploying apps on Azure. With these, we can do things like deploying our apps and running them on Windows or Linux in the cloud. And right now, some new capabilities that have been announced is you can now have a perpetual free tier, so you can effectively build Linux-based applications at no cost. And you get virtual network support provided. And with functions, some new things have come out recently as well. You may have played with some of these in the private releases. Premium functions is a new feature where you get 0 cold start for your functions. That means if you have your functions running in the premium service, and you create these, when somebody hits those for the first time, they spin up very fast and immediately, so we can use those functions right away. And whether you're writing in Java, Node with JavaScript, .NET, or Python, and now introducing PowerShell support, you can build these functions to create your cloud-native apps. And to demonstrate how you can build some of these applications, I'd like to invite on stage Craig Shoemaker.
John? Thanks. I'll use my computer over here. So there's a lot of love for serverless web apps right now. They're fast, secure, and they can scale to almost limitless levels. And what I'd like to do is show you how to build one right now that can stay up to date in real time. So let's set the stage just a little bit. Let's say that you're coming home from the conference. You still have Florida sand in your shoes. You walk into the office, and the conversation is ablaze by the rock star intern that just did their demo. And everybody's excited. They want you to take the app and put it live on Monday for the new product release. Well, you're a professional, so you look at them and say, no. But you do want to take a look at the app just to see what's going on and see if anything jumps out at you. So what I have running on the screen right now is a stock ticker app. And it's built using Vue, which is a JavaScript framework, kind of like React or Angular. And it's just really simple and works well with SignalR, which we're going to be plugging into. So let's take a look at the developer console and see what's going on here. And so it's fetching stocks from the server. And in fact, if we go over to the network tab, you can see it just keeps polling the server over and over again. So it's a little bit inefficient. And if we take a look at the payload here, you'll see that the value of the database just keeps coming, all the stocks are coming through with each request. So there's a much better way in which we can handle this type of situation. So I'll switch over to Visual Studio Code, and what I've done is I've added a new serverless function into the mix in order to help things out a little bit. So the way this function works is that it's bound to our database. So it's going against Azure Cosmos DB, and what allows us to work with is the change feed. So as anything changes within the database, if you're doing update, delete, change, modify anything, the change feed will fire and this function will then be triggered. So we can make connection to it through the connection string right here, and then it'll expose the changes to my function through an argument called documents. Now on top of that, we can snap onto it another set of features through SignalR. Now SignalR is the technology that will allow us to build real-time web apps. And instead of being able to have to require our app to go to the server and asking for information continually, this allows push-based notifications so the server can just tell connected clients, hey, here's your latest information. So I can add that binding into my function by adding it to the connection strings and make it available that way. So now I'll switch over to the code that runs the function itself. Now the nice thing about our bindings is that it makes the code for the function almost trivial. At this point, I'm taking a look at the change documents that are coming into the function, and then I can update it by adding a little bit of metadata so that the client will know what sort of messages to handle. From there, I can tell SignalR, here's my updates, and make it available up to the client. So now I'll switch over to the code that runs within the browser, and so this is our JavaScript that powers the page. As long as I have a connection to SignalR, from there I can handle my updated message and then update the stocks. This goes into my very simple view component, and it looks at the stocks that we're tracking. If it finds a match, it updates it, and view handles the hard work of updating the UI for us. Now, what's nice about working in this type of environment is that by using Visual Studio Code, I can very easily interface with functions and with storage, all right here within the IDE. So from here, I can use my extensions to create new functions, to create new function apps, and also upload the functions as they're available, and do the exact same thing for storage. So I've taken my HTML files, my JavaScript, the CSS, everything that runs this static website, and made it available through this extension up into my storage account. Now that's already done, so let's take a look at the updated version of the application. And so we have it running here. If we go into the developer tools, you'll notice that the network tab is nice and silent. When I come over to the console, you can see that SignalR connection is established, and so I can then run a script that contacts my database in the back end and just simulates a response. Now, let's say that our ABC stock just put up a new press release, and things didn't go quite so well for them, and so maybe the stock updated, so I will update this value here as the change made in the database. There you can see that the ABC stock has updated on the page automatically without having to request that information manually. So the three things that I can give you are the fact that functions and Azure Storage give you a foundation that you need in order to build serverless web apps. Number two, when you add SignalR to that mix, you have a great tool set in order to be able to create real-time applications. And we have a slide here coming up on the screen. The best part about it is you can go through this same exact scenario on your own time with access to free Azure services by going through an interactive tutorial that we have here. So when you go to this link, you can go through the tutorial. It takes you step by step through everything that you've seen here. You have access to the code from there, and then you get started building real-time serverless web apps.
Thanks, Craig. One of the things that Craig just showed you here is really, it's just an application, right? But it's really an application entirely hosted in the cloud. That's the cool thing about cloud-native applications. You build your application in your favorite tools. You host the app in storage. That's where your files for your web app will be. Azure Functions managing your APIs, all hosted in the cloud. Hitting a database hosted in the cloud with Azure Cosmos DB. Then using real-time data services with SignalR to manage that data, pushing it back up into the cloud. So everything is hosted in a cloud-native way. And the really nice thing is that Craig pointed out you can do everything he just did by walking through this Learn module at this link right here. Microsoft Learn is a great site where you can go through and at your own pace, and it's gamified, where you go through different modules to learn how to do these different things right inside your browser. And there's a Cloud Shell integrated into this experience, so you can just walk through coding it right in front of you. Now, switching gears one more time into our third phase of the story, artificial intelligence is really become mainstream, and there's so many different things that we can do with AI and data. And to explain some of the ways you can use AI with Azure and how easy it is to enable yourselves and your companies to take advantage of this, I'd like to invite on stage Aishigal.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Can you see my slides? I can. Okay. All right, thank you. Cognitive services are a set of tools that you can use that are built on breakthrough AI research at Microsoft. These services are available to you in our Azure services. We have pre-trained models with our cognitive services that allows you to start building without having to know a lot about data science or AI in general. You can further improve these models over time and extend them using our machine learning services. You can use your choice of framework to extend these models and deploy it to Azure cloud clusters with massive GPU capabilities. These models can detect data from your intelligent device, and they can run on your devices as well as using the REST APIs. So you will have the security of running your machine learning in your app, in your device, or in your local network. I want to tell you about the new capabilities that we introduced with the cognitive services. One of the categories is decisions. With decisions, we have personalization service, where we help you to give recommendations to your users and make business decisions. You can also moderate your content in your platforms with the decision services and detect any anomalies in your applications or user behavior. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. For vision services, we added two new amazing capabilities. First one is the ink recognizer. Ink recognizer enables you to detect handwritten notes in 63 languages. The other one is the form recognizer. Without having to label any of your data, you can train our models by taking pictures of your forms, and we are able to detect the layout and form in your form fields and connect them to the values. One last addition is for our speech services. We introduce advanced capabilities to transcribe conversations in real time. These conversations can be further analyzed by our language services to detect your user's intention and their emotion. With search, we enable you to search through billions of web pages, videos, images, and news articles. You can customize these searches according to your context. We would add an annotation to your search and make sure that your search has these specific context. Now, every additional annotation, every metadata we add to your search is available to you, so you can build further solutions or use it to analyze your data. Using all of these cognitive services, our engineers build Seeing AI for visually impaired. What Seeing AI does is can read menus in a restaurant out loud, can read handwritten notes, can detect barcodes and define the products, can analyze the environment and tell you about what is happening around you, as well as detect the emotions of the people who are around you. Let's take a look. Going the wrong way.
I'm Sakib Sheikh. I lost my sight when I was 7, and shortly after that I went to a school for the blind. And that's where I was introduced to talking computers, and that really opened up a whole new world of opportunities. I joined Microsoft 10 years ago as a software engineer. I love making things which improve people's lives. And one of the things I've always dreamt of since I was at university was this idea of something that could tell you at any moment what's going on around you.
I think it's a man jumping in the air doing a trick on a skateboard.
I teamed up with like-minded engineers to make an app which lets you know who and what is around you. It's based on top of the Microsoft Intelligence APIs, which makes it so much easier to make this kind of thing. The app runs on smartphones, but also on the Pivot Head smart glasses. When you're talking to a bigger group, sometimes you can talk and there's no response, and you think, is everyone listening really well, or are they half asleep? And you never know.
I see two faces, 40-year-old man with a beard looking surprised, 20-year-old woman looking happy.
The app can describe the general age and gender of the people around me and what their emotions are, which is incredible. One of the things that's most useful about the app is the ability to read out text.
Hello, good afternoon. Here's your menu.
Great, thank you. I can use the app on my phone to take a picture of the menu, and it's going to guide me on how to take that correct photo.
Move camera to the bottom right and away from the document.
And then it'll recognize the text. Read me the headings.
I see appetizers, salads, paninis, pizzas, pastas.
Years ago, this was science fiction. I never thought it would be something that you could actually do, but artificial intelligence is improving at an ever faster rate, and I'm really excited to see where we can take this. As engineers, we're always standing on the shoulders of giants, building on top of what went before. And in this case, we've taken years of research from Microsoft Research to pull this off.
I think it's a young girl throwing an orange frisbee in the park.
For me, it's about taking that far-off dream and building it one step at a time. I think this is just the beginning.
Now, all of these services are available for you, so you can build custom solutions for your needs. Next up, we will have Jeff Holland show you a demo of how you could use some of these services as well.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you, Ashiko. That was awesome and a good overview. Thank you. Of cognitive services, so let me show you a few now, because the thing that really excites me about Azure when it comes to machine learning and artificial intelligence is just what Ashiko was talking about. We have this rich suite that spans from these pre-built machine learning models with things like cognitive services, all of the advances that Microsoft's been making to build experiences like Xbox and Cortana are being deployed as APIs that any developer can take advantage of. But then if you need to extend those pre-built models and build something a bit more custom, it just folds directly into more advanced, custom AI services. So I want to show you all, I want to bring this all together. Let's take a scenario. Let's grab some serverless compute. Let's grab some artificial intelligence. Let's use some dev tools. And let's build something end-to-end in like 2 minutes or less. So to do that, here's the challenge I want to do. Okay, I have here a very sad and very empty Power BI dashboard with no data on it. And I get a call from our team, and they say, Jeff, we need to know everybody who's tweeting about Disney right now. And I need to know if they're happy or if they're sad. And so you need to be able to first get all of the data from Twitter, you need to be able to scale on all the data from Twitter, and then you need to use some artificial intelligence to populate this dashboard. And I mentioned I only had 2 minutes. So I want to show you how you can very easily start to take advantage of this and integrate your data sources to start connecting them to your machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities. So in order to populate our dashboard on tweets about Disney, we're going to use a serverless service in Azure called Logic Apps. So I've created here a brand new Azure Logic app. This is for creating integration workflows, for connecting and pulling data from different services and pushing them to different systems or APIs that I might have, maybe on premises and maybe in the cloud. So in this case, my empty Logic app is asking me, okay, what's the event? What's the data that you want me to process on top of? And the nice thing here about Logic Apps is that it actually comes out of the box, with over 200 connectors. So you can see here I have Twitter right there at the top, but in addition to Twitter, I have other Azure services like Azure Container Instances, I have Azure IoT. As I continue to scroll down this list, there's GitHub, there's Bitbucket, sorry, I'm struggling with the zoom, so I'll just stick here. We have all of these different services. You'll notice a number of these icons where I can say, you know what? I want to inject intelligence onto emails that are coming into my customer support team. I want to inject intelligence to our Teams channel, to SAP, to Dynamics, you name it. Here, without writing any code, I can click into any of these connectors and start pulling data from them. So here, I don't want to click that one. I actually want to click Twitter. So let me come back in here. And we're going to say we want to create one that can listen to all of the tweets happening in the world with Twitter. So when a new tweet is posted, and I already mentioned the topic that I've decided to care about is Disney, because for some reason Disney has been on my mind all day. So now, when a new tweet is posted, I want to process it. And here's where I want to be able to run it through some machine learning. And again, what I like here is that while I could now call a custom machine learning model that I created, we have a number of these cognitive services that are just ready for me to use out of the box. So if I wanted to, I could pull images and run them through a Face API. I could have object detection with the custom vision service or the computer vision API. I could do Bing search for entity analysis, natural language, question and answer. All of these capabilities, I'm not even going to have to write any code. I'm just going to say, let's do some text analytics here. I want to detect the sentiment of a tweet. So I'm going to choose this pre-built cognitive service. I'm going to choose to pass in some text here, and we will pass in whatever the person tweeted about. So we'll pass in the tweet text. Now what this is going to do is it's going to return for me a score between 0 and 1. 0 would be like the most negative, sad tweet in the world, like Disney is the worst. And 1 would be the most positive thing, which is like, oh, I went to Star Wars land and I have died and gone to heaven. This is fantastic. And so I have this score now, but what I really want on my dashboard is I want to have some categories like red, yellow, and green. And to do that, I can actually start to call my own custom code, my own custom logic as well. So I'm going to come here to one of these connectors, and I can call things like an Azure Function. This is like one of the Azure functions that Craig just showed you a second ago. Here I have one that I've already built that has a function running in the cloud, ready to run compute, that can detect sentiment. In fact, I should have it right here in Visual Studio Code. This is the code that I'm going to be running. It's very simple. I'm going to get in the score. And if the score is less than 0.3, I'll mark it red. Less than 0.6, it's yellow. And everything higher than 0.6 is green. So now I can color coordinate their tweet sentiment. So let's go ahead and call that function here. And I'm going to pass in the score. And the last step, I need to get all this data to Power BI. And again, I have this nice out-of-the-box connector for me, ready to go. So let's go ahead and select that action here. And say we want to add some rows to Power BI. And here, I've already authenticated with my account, and I can even come in here and choose my workspace, choose the data set that I have ready to go, and select the table. And what you'll notice here is it's actually dynamically populating. It's looking at my Power BI account, and it's saying, oh, hey, I notice that you have these different tables, these different columns. Which ones do you want to add value for? I want to add values for all of them. So let's go ahead now and populate this. If my scroll, it's really not behaving nicely today, is it? So let me zoom out here to make sure I can finish this. Tweet text. We'll put in tweeted by. Who made the tweet? And for those who want to participate, if you get your tweets ready to go around Disney, don't send it until I click save. But we should be able to pass in the score of the tweet. Wow, I'm really struggling with this browser. Let's zoom out a little bit. My Mac is fighting. My Edge browser is fighting. Let's pass in the score, when it was created, and finally that category that we got from our Azure function, which maybe we'll grab here at the bottom somewhere. Where's our Azure function category? Right here. Okay, so that's the whole workflow. Apologies for the scrolling errors. So now once I click save here, this is going to start listening to Twitter, pulling in those data from that real-time data source, running it through some machine learning, and then populating our Power BI dashboard. In fact, if we wait here for a second, hopefully somebody's going to be tweeting about Disney either in the room or out in the world. You can actually see here, I was looking before, it looks like someone tweets about Disney about once every 5 seconds. And here we got one. In fact, we got a tweet. I wonder if it's someone in this room. Nope. They say, new mantra, always eat like I'm on vacation, something about Disney. This sounds good. We pulled out the sentiment, which was very positive. They've got a heart in there. They're saying Disney World. Maybe it is someone who's here. And then I populated this dashboard. So if I switch over here, what once was a very sad and empty dashboard, you'll actually notice this dashboard is now lighting up in real time for every single person in the world who is sending a tweet about Disney. You can see where in the world they're tweeting from. I see my categories, green, red, and yellow. And I can see this timeline of tweets as they're coming in. So since I saved it, there's been 4 people who've tweeted about Disney. Some of you might see your tweets pop up here if you tweet within the next few seconds. But what I really wanted to show you here is that these concepts of machine learning don't have to be something that you need to be a data scientist to start to take advantage of. They don't even have to require a whole bunch of code. In this case, without writing more than those few lines of an Azure function, I was able to take an end-to-end scenario, push data in here to Power BI, and get real-time insights. There's a lot of people tweeting about Disney now. Some of you might be on this list. And I can see here that for the most part, people are pretty positive about Disney. So that's what I wanted to show you here. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you understand how you can start bringing these capabilities in. And with that, I want to invite John back up on the stage to help close us out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff.
Ready? Yeah.
Always a great demo when you can do Twitter and Disney World and Azure together. Hey, why not? So Jeff just showed you how you can use AI with Logic Apps to build these kinds of applications. And if we looked at the story that we looked at this afternoon, we've seen this all week long. You've got great developer tools that you can use to build your applications. And Shane walked us through how we can take those applications and deploy those up to the cloud to Kubernetes. We connect all those together, and we can then surface them in cloud-native applications, as Craig showed us with serverless functions using services like SignalR. And then we can tie in things like Icicle and Jeff showed us with artificial intelligence inside of Azure, using some of the newest features in cognitive services. But what I wanted to do now is, as we wrap up this story, we've been here all week, so have you. We want to hear your feedback. We want to give you a chance to engage with us and with the Azure team that's here. So I'd like to invite back on stage all the speakers that came out here from the Azure team. And we're going to have Tim run around the audience and with a microphone and offer you a chance to ask them some questions or just to provide feedback on experiences that you've had with Azure. So we've got the team up here. And Tim is going to run around. The goal of today, by the way, is to make Tim run from the furthest point in the room to the other furthest point. So if you don't know who Tim is, Tim, raise your hand. There he goes. And I'd like to kick off the questions. Maybe just raise your hand and Tim will come find you. One of the questions I have is AI, Jeff and Icicle. When you're using artificial intelligence with cognitive services, we hear a lot of people using these things a lot and not realizing how easy it is to dive into cognitive services. Or the other option is we can write custom AI logic, right, with ML. How does somebody know when they enter this arena and then know which one of these to choose, custom or cognitive services?
I can start. That's the whole point of our cognitive services. We pre-build our models with a lot of data over time, so you can start from them and you can choose from them. Once you've done that in many different services, you can extend these solutions. One of them is Lewis, our language understanding service, where you could go and define some of the sentences that users might utter and define the intentions of your users. So this is called supervised learning. So you are supervising, you are adding more data into the application using our tools.
Yeah, sorry, I need to get this mic. I think that's a great start. And in general, I think my answer would be pretty similar to a lot of things in Azure. We were just talking about this in a session that I was giving right before this keynote. I always try to start as far on the easy slider as possible whenever I'm solving any problem, and then work my way backwards. So it's like the first thing I will do when I have a problem is it's like, is there a fully pre-built cognitive service that can do this? Like, can I do the face or the sentiment detection? Is that enough? And if the answer is no, then I'll move down to the next stage, which is like the supervised learning stuff, where it's like, well, maybe I can provide it some sample data, but I'm still not having to go all the way into this world of, you know, ML.NET, TensorFlow, whatever else. And if that's not sufficient, then I would finally kind of say like, okay, I'm going to have to go create my own custom model. But it's you know, very often you can get a long way with these fully pre-built ones, and the benefit there is that you've spent far less time, and you've got off the ground, and you've got a solution up and ready to go.
That's great. And again, if you have a question, just go ahead and flag down Tim over on the left. One of the things I've heard a lot this week, which from many of you actually, it's probably the most common question that I've been asked. We've got a gentleman in the front row here, Tim, is that, Tim, you can run faster than that. Is that we have so many ways to deploy to Azure these days. We showed a few of them today. You can deploy through a CLI. You can deploy through Visual Studio Code. You can deploy through Visual Studio. You can deploy through the portal. You can deploy through Azure Pipelines. How do you choose?
I mean, I think one of the things we always talk about with Visual Studio is that it is so easy to just do from the comfort of your own tools. So many things like authentication, the fact that we have keychain integration, like so many Azure services just work because of how much time we've spent on Visual Studio tooling to make it that easy. And so if you're just getting started, like I always encourage people to start with Visual Studio. It's got the UI, so much is taken care of. You just have to figure out what you want to do.
It's like the easy button inside the tooling to get you there.
To get you started, to sort of like, it's great for the quick prototyping, the proof of concepts, to understand, you know, what your application might feel like with an Azure service without getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, and even if you're not certain, there's like quite a bit of free Azure credit to use before it actually starts. So if you're in a prototyping stage, you're not sure if your boss will buy in and all of that, you can just hop on. It's good.
Yeah, so which one do you choose?
I mean, I'm not an Azure expert, so I'm usually going through our UI.
Through our UIs, yeah.
Yeah.
And Shane, you did the DevOps tool. Is that what you normally use?
I hate to answer with the it depends.
Does it depend?
You're never wrong.
Yeah, I would say previously I was very common for me to do the right-click publish. As I started to use the command line, that became my thing. I struggled with Azure Pipelines because I had to set up a build pipeline, then I had to set up a release pipeline, and there was all this kind of domain-specific language I had to learn. So every system has its own little voodoo that you have to learn. Now that we have this one kind of single configuration file in pipelines, I say the last 5 projects, that just becomes, I click the button to say, yes, add pipelines to my GitHub repo. And now that's just kind of my thing. That becomes automatic.
Yeah, I think what you're explaining is my experience too. And for those of you in the audience who don't know, we have a conglomeration of Azure team members here who work on the products themselves and also work on the docs. Craig works on the docs that you read and hopefully you read and work on quite often. If you don't, get in there. And then Shane and I work on the developer advocacy team. One of the interesting things about Shane's experience, which I'd like to call out, is it's a lot like many of yours, I imagine, where the first time you tried it, you went through different variations to figure out what works or what doesn't work. And that's kind of what Shane's explaining, is a lot of times we have the benefit of walking in your shoes to find out what's painful and what's not. And that helps develop the product and bring feedback to the rest of these fine folks. We had a question up here, Tim?
Hi. Thank you, first of all, for a great conference so far. My question, I fear, might be an it depends question. but I'll ask it anyways. I love Kubernetes and the things it's provide. Docker is just phenomenal. I really want to get on the Azure Functions bus, but working on an enterprise application that also has lots of business logic and very wide in breadth. Functions seem to take away some of the server management and also kind of reduce the complexity of these various functions. But what my fear is that it would be also difficult to visualize kind of the whole mesh of all these functions. Are Azure Functions kind of not the right tool for the job in that scenario? Or is it more of a combination of potentially functions as well as Kubernetes and Docker and whatnot?
So if I hear you, Louis, make sure we're hearing the question right. And it's probably a question directed mostly at Jeff.
Craig.
I'm gonna let you take this one.
With Azure Functions, before you did Azure Functions, you had your own API structure, your own servers and managing it all. Now with Azure Functions, how do you see that whole view? How do you make sure that, yeah, it's great with one function that we show, but what if you've got more functions and now you need to be able to turn these on or off or scale up or scale down? Is that what you're asking?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a common, again, when we talk about...
You almost don't need the mic, by the way, you're so loud.
I know, I really am. I hope they turn me down. I told them even beforehand, I was like, I will be so excited that I will shout, even with the mic. We talk about these trade-offs, and often people get really excited with their first function and their 10th function. A week ago, I was on a call with one of our customers, and they're like, yeah, we have 600 Azure functions that power our business end to end. And like, that's a massive amount of functions that they're managing. And I think to your point, one of the things that makes Kubernetes nice is that you are managing a cluster. And that at the end of the day, even though you might have 600 services in that cluster, you have a single cluster. And in a lot of ways, you can manage a single entity. And with functions, it can be hard because it's like, I have 600 wild mice that I don't know where they're running and how do I shepherd them all together. So it is something that you have to be thoughtful with. As a team, I would say it's something we're very aware of. Recently, we've been spending a lot of energy, and it's something I showed earlier this week. There's a feature called the app map, where just by default, because we're running your code and you're using the Azure Functions programming model, we'll actually emit some correlation IDs, and you can actually visualize. You had function 1 get called, which called function 2, which called function 3, which called function 4. And we'll actually draw it out for you. Now, that's just a start. Like, there's a long way to go here. There's things that work, but your question is totally accurate. And it's something that it's not going to come for free, at least not yet. We still need some more time to do on it. It is something that if you can be thoughtful about it, and you can keep an eye on it and use things like DevOps and App Insights. I've seen enterprises be successful with their 600 apps, but that is one of the areas where it's like that is a different way of thinking, whereas in the Kubernetes world where you have a single cluster, so it is a bit of an it depends. I think you're right.
And Jeff, to add on to that, and I think the answer is it depends, but if you have 600 of these functions, do you recommend 600 function apps, 600 functions in one app, 600 break them up, or just call Jeff and have a phone call?
We'll put his phone number up on the screen after this. You sure can. I'm pretty accessible. The way that I think about this is, because in functions, you can have a single function app, which is made up of many functions. And the most important rule when deciding how to build, not just your functions, really any microservice or monoservice, your function app is your unit of deployment, and it's your unit of scale. So if you are working with logic that you are comfortable being deployed and versioned and scaled as a single unit, then it's totally cool to be in a single function app. But if I have something like my customer function that returns customer data and my product function that returns product data, if I put those in the same app, it means if I ever do a V2 of one of those, I have to do a V2 of all of those. So I might as well split them up. It's a pure convenience to put them together. There's no perf or other benefits you get from combining them. So the way I think of it is like, what's the functional thing that this is doing? Does this make sense to be grouped as a single thing, or does it make more sense to be broken apart?
I think it's great. Good answer for this. And if you have feedback for us on this, on what you would like to see, catch us afterwards, and you can talk to these folks. Again, also, if you want to see something in the docs, let us know about that as well. Do we have another question?
Yeah, hi. I was actually curious what the official party line is between using GitHub versus Azure DevOps for repositories. Our company started the migration to DevOps away from GitHub prior to Microsoft's acquisition, and we're kind of in this weird mix where and I hope nobody on this panel has been involved with UI in DevOps, but it's terrible for multiple repos. GitHub lends itself to more easily managed repos at large quantities. What is the official stance on GitHub versus Azure DevOps as far as the repository? Will they ever become a unified plane? Should we be pushing to one or the other if we're in one ecosystem or other for repository? Do you have any opinions?
And again, just to make sure I got you right on this, there's been an evolution of source code repositories. Obviously, GitHub and Azure DevOps do a lot of things, but specifically it sounds like you're talking just about where your source code is put, the repositories themselves, right? Okay.
Yeah, our pipelines are all in Azure DevOps at this point.
Yeah, and years ago, and I'm dating myself, when I had hair, there was a product called Visual Source Safe out there, and a lot of us use that. Many of you may have seen that, maybe not, I don't know. So there were tools in the past we used to do these things, and the evolution has come for a long time. And for years, some of the predecessors to Azure DevOps, the names TFS, VSTS, the Shane Boyer app, a couple others. We had different names for this product, but they were different backends for what the source code was stored in. And I think that's what you're caught in right now. So different kinds. GitHub is really surfaced as the emerging winner of what do you put your repositories in. However, this doesn't mean that the tools that we have are going to drop support of the other things. So the backings that are in Azure DevOps are there, and they're perfectly viable, and they're being supported. If I was starting today, I would recommend you start with GitHub as the backend for the repository. Even through Azure DevOps, you can do that. And you can still use Git as a repository in Azure DevOps today. That would be my recommendation to go there. But there is no official party line other than that. If you want to use the GitHub repositories the way they are, use those. If you want to keep your code in Azure DevOps using the repository you have, that's still going to work for you as well.
Yeah, and just some of the demos you'll see and some of the documentation you'll see too is that when you're building your pipelines, it doesn't matter where the code is, right? It can be in Git or TFS or, you know,
or Visual Source Safe?
Yeah, or maybe not that, but you know, but it can be in any of those repositories, Bitbucket, it can be in any, you know, any of those back-end types of repositories, and your pipeline can pull from all of those. And if you migrate from one to the other, making that one change in your pipeline will make that changeover easily. So hopefully it makes the migration, if you choose to do that, a lot easier than trying to build and then make a combination build later on, that at least you can initiate a single pipeline and be able to have the source in multiple places. We've worked hard to make that a possibility.
And if you have feedback again as well on like what your experience has been like and what's struggling, and specifically you mentioned some of the UI that was painful for you, using my words. You just put a gun to your head. That's not good. Don't do that. But if you have feedback on those things, definitely catch us afterwards. We can gather that. While we're not on that team, we're advocates for you. So give us that feedback. We can gather that and bring it back to the team and maybe put you in touch with them as well. And that goes for anybody here in this room.
Yeah.
I see Tim running like his pants are on fire, so we'll wait for the next question.
Yeah, so hi. At this conference I heard a bit about Kubernetes, and a few years ago we started using Service Fabric since it was really cool to use and it fitted our problem. It was a valuable solution. I don't hear as much about Service Fabric, so I was wondering, should we abandon ship and head over to Kubernetes, or what is the plan for this?
So you're on Service Fabric today?
Yeah.
And it's in production?
It's in production, yeah.
Okay, and you're asking, should I go towards Kubernetes? Should I stick with my investment in Service Fabric?
Yeah, indeed.
I can start with this, and then I'm sure others will have some too, because this is something we run into a lot. And again, shameless plugging my own sessions in the past. This came up there as well. So I'm on the Azure Compute team, and the way that I would think about this is two ways. The first is Kubernetes is a container orchestrator. One of the things that Service Fabric does is container orchestration. Service Fabric can actually do a bit more. I think what's motivating some of the messaging is in terms of like whereas 2 years ago it was like, look, there's Service Fabric, there's Kubernetes, there's Docker Swarm, there's Mesos, there's all these different container orchestrator things. That battle in the industry has more or less kind of been won by Kubernetes. For that feature specifically, like KubeCon happened 2 weeks ago in Europe, something like 13,000 developers showed up at that conference. Like just an unreal amount of people are excited about Kubernetes. So one of the reasons that you'll hear us talk about Kubernetes a lot is because that's what we're hearing customers ask us the most about. Like people who are coming in or saying, hey, we want to go cloud native, more often than they're asking us about Kubernetes. So our messaging has kind of evolved to try to match what people are expecting to find. Now that said, Service Fabric is still a very important piece of not only our portfolio, but also how we run Azure itself. Like I use Service Fabric in production because most of Azure is built with Service Fabric behind the scenes. So it's not going anywhere. It's still around. It's still an incredibly powerful tool. And Service Fabric does provide some unique abilities that Kubernetes doesn't. Things like their programming models around actors and stateful services. It's a very opinionated, very powerful set of tools that really doesn't compete directly with Kubernetes. So I think my answer would be Service Fabric is still a fine place to go. I think you'll see more momentum around the industry wide, like AWS, Google, Azure, everyone around this Kubernetes central orchestrator thing for that piece. But that's not to say that it's going anywhere. You need to worry about that. We're going to send an email next week that says we're shutting it down, because we'd also be shutting down most of our own services, which were built on Service Fabric too.
Hopefully we don't shut a lot of things down.
We what?
We don't shut a lot of things down.
We really don't, for better or for worse.
For better or for worse. I mean, people are using these things, they're relying on this code, so we don't go there. The other side is, I was thinking too, is that there's a lot of migration. I mean, technology changes, right? That's why we're here. And when technology changes, one of the things we all look to is these conferences and conversations, but also documentation to figure out how do we get from this point to that point. We had a few questions on how do we go from where we are to where we want to be in the future, and what's that inflection point where we should look at moving from maybe Service Fabric, Kubernetes, if there is one even. And I think this is one of the things we can probably surface more in things like the docs, Craig, where we show, here's where you are today, here's where you want to be.
Right.
Do we have that kind of, not specifically in that one, but do we have content like that where people can search for this?
Yeah, we're trying to find ways to connect the dots. So one of the things that I talked about in my talk was the Learn modules. And so what that gives you the chance to do is take a scenario that ties together a number of different services and go through that using free Azure services. And so you'll be able to start with a certain type of context, and we'll take you through that narrative of going from point A to point B and really help figure out, I mean, when I was in consulting before I was an employee, the hardest thing I had was you have this piece documented over here, you have that piece documented over here, but what does it look like for it all fit together? And so the learn aspect of the docs is really trying to help address that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things I really appreciate about Microsoft Learn is, and I've been teaching for 20 years, what I really like about it is, I get asked these conferences a lot, yes, John, it's great, I know how to use functions now, or now I know how to use SignalR, now I know how to use whatever the service is. But very few of us, I'm willing to bet, from the things I'm hearing, work with one tool. Usually you're putting multiple things together. And the hard part is those scenarios. The exact word you use, Craig, is scenarios. When you've got an app and it's, you're in Visual Studio and you're trying to work with Node and you're trying to hook SignalR and you want to deploy to Azure Cosmos and use functions and you want to use Kubernetes, where do you go? And I think that's the reason I'm most excited about Learn, because now there's a place for us to give you those scenarios where you can try them out, because it does depend on what you're doing. Tim, any other questions out there?
I don't see one. I have one.
Go for it.
All your demos were JavaScript. Why do you hate .NET?
That's called a plant, by the way. I'm actually shocked nobody used .NET.
My function was .NET.
Our whole thing was .NET. I don't know.
All right.
Tim might not have been paying attention.
There we go. Why no VB.NET?
Our whole thing was .NET and C#.
You were dancing too much, I was.
Okay.
Jeff, you didn't show code, though.
I showed a little bit of code.
It was there for a moment.
You did.
But that's all you needed with .NET. Just a taste of it and you're sold. You're like, oh yeah, this is it.
That's sweet .NET.
I was appealing to the angle brackets conference.
All right.
Okay.
Well, the last question I have for you all is something I've seen a lot of is Visual Studio Code. When it was first released 5 years ago, I believe, there were a lot of this question. Wait, do I have to stop using Visual Studio now that Visual Studio Code's out? What's the difference between these two things? Why, are they going to merge at some point? Is Visual Studio Code going to add in all the features Visual Studio has? And I think we've seen at this point after 5 years, they're not merging. They are separate products, and they're really targeting different audiences. But the question really gets to live share, which was one of the features you all were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm really excited that now, like, if I'm on one side of the world and iShiggle's on the other, across the country, we can actually code with each other in different environments. I can be building I'll do a .NET app for you, Tim. I'm building a .NET app on Visual Studio on Windows. And iShiggle's like, man, I'm sitting on my Mac and I've got Node. I don't even know how to spell .NET. How do I help John? I wanted to help doing this debugging. She can run all this, right? Like without having to install anything.
Yep, all she needs is Visual Studio Code with the live share extension. That's it. That's literally all you need.
That's it. And how much does the live share extension cost?
0.
Really? I don't know. I think Bitcoin's attached to it, but okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure you all understand. We've got lots of opportunity here for feedback. We've heard a lot of great questions throughout the week. I've heard a bunch of things about ASP.NET running with Angular. How do I run my JavaScript apps up in the cloud with Azure? If you have any other questions on those, come see us afterwards. Serverless functions, let us know. We've heard a lot of those today. And of course, Kubernetes. And Tim, you've got one final question? Got a few minutes left?
So, we are a total WPF shop back home. And it seems like, on the internet at least, it's like WPF is dying technology. What is the roadmap for WPF? Is it done, or?
If we only had somebody here who used to work on the WPF team recently standing behind you.
Yeah, so I used to work on, I'll come to the front to answer this question. I'm going to defend my XAML here.
Don't turn your back, Tim.
Yeah, I won't. So yeah, I was in one of the sessions as well. A lot of hands raised for WPF and Windows Forms, both of like still developing client applications and maintaining those applications. So thankfully for .NET Core 3, we've done a lot of work on the .NET ecosystem to port WPF and Windows Forms to be able to run under .NET Core 3. All the investment in .NET is moving to the kind of that core path, and we've got a lot of new tools. The .NET Portability Analyzer will help you analyze your WPF and Windows Forms app to make sure that they can run under .NET Core 3. And so your WPF app has a long life as long as it's running on .NET Core. That's really the answer there. In fact, for WPF specifically, we have some renewed investment in features within WPF as well. If you weren't aware, we open sourced WPF this past year. I think even just this week we dropped, or within the past 3 weeks, we dropped 13 more, source for 13 more binaries in WPF, including presentation framework, which is the big one. So we want to collaborate with the community there. We'll be taking contributions, and we'll be investing in that framework ourselves. Visual Studio runs on WPF and Windows Forms and MFC and all sorts of UI frameworks. So
everything.
Everything, yeah. So your investment, if WPF works for you today, if Windows Forms works for you today, and you feel productive and you're happy in that development environment, then you should continue to do it. Just move to the .NET Core path as far as your runtime for the longest life.
That's a really good question. We actually hear that one quite a bit with WPF because there's a lot of apps still out there running on this technology, so absolutely. And again, if you have any feedback, please come up afterwards. We're out of time here, but thank you for coming, and come up on stage afterwards and we can gather any questions you have. Thanks.